He grabbed her wrist in front of 200 people and smiled like he owned her. That was the moment Selena Hart understood, really understood, that Damian Cross had never been afraid of losing her. He had only ever been afraid of losing control of her. One wrong move, one public humiliation, one stranger who stepped forward when no one else would. And everything changed. If you were standing in that ballroom, in that dress, with that man's hand locked around your wrist and his voice low enough that only you could hear the threat, what would you have done? Would you have smiled and pretended, walked away, fallen apart? Or would you have taken the arm of the most dangerous man in the room and decided, tonight you were done being small? Before we go any further, if this story already has you feeling something, please hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like so this story finds the people who need it. And leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next in that ballroom? Nobody saw it coming. The dress was a mistake. Selena knew it the moment she zipped it up in the tiny bathroom of her apartment. A navy sheath she'd bought 2 years ago for a company dinner she'd ended up skipping because Damian said the neckline was inappropriate. She'd never worn it. She'd kept it in the back of her closet like a small act of quiet defiance, still in its dry cleaning bag, still carrying the ghost of an argument she'd never won. She wore it tonight because she was tired of making herself smaller. Her boss, Gerald Marsh, CEO of Marsh Capital Group, had made it clear that her attendance at the Ashford Charity Gala was not optional. "You're my right hand, Selena," he'd said, in the distracted way people said things when they were already thinking about something else. "I need you there. You handle the room better than I do." She did handle the room better than he did. She remembered names, connected faces to company affiliations, smoothed over Gerald's occasional bluntness with a well-timed smile. She had been doing it for 8 months, ever since she walked into Marsh Capital still shaking, not visibly, never visibly, and convinced a skeptical HR director that her 6-year gap in career progression was due to supporting a partner through a serious illness. That wasn't entirely a lie. She had supported someone. It was just that the illness had been his ego. The Ashford Gala was held at the Meridian Grand Hotel, 22 floors of marble and chandelier light in the center of the financial district. Selena arrived with Gerald and his wife, Catherine, in a town car that smelled like new leather and Catherine's expensive perfume. Catherine was kind in the automatic way of women who had never needed anything from anyone, and she patted Selena's hand twice during the ride and said, "You look lovely, dear," in a tone that suggested she was mildly surprised. Selena smiled and said thank you, and watched the city blur past the window. She had not been to a gala since Damian. She had not been to much of anything since Damian. The first months after leaving had been a kind of managed collapse. She'd moved into a studio apartment, stopped answering her phone for 2 weeks, eaten cereal for dinner more times than she could count, and cried in the shower every morning so she could be functional by the time she got to the office. Nobody at Marsh Capital knew any of that. She was very good at compartmentalization. It was the one skill 6 years with Damian had genuinely sharpened. The ballroom was full when they arrived. 300 people, maybe more, in the kind of evening wear that announced serious money without trying too hard. Selena stayed close to Gerald for the first hour, managing his conversations, keeping his champagne glass from getting too full because he had a tendency to say regrettable things when he drank, and quietly steering him away from a Belgian financier he'd had a dispute with 2 years prior. She was so focused on Gerald that she didn't see Damian until he was already across the room. And then she did. He was standing near the bar, taller than most of the men around him, in a charcoal suit that fit him the way everything fit Damian, like it had been constructed specifically to announce his importance. He had a woman beside him, small and blonde, with the kind of delicate prettiness that photographed beautifully. Selena recognized her after a half-second delay. Isabelle Fontaine, the only daughter of Henri Fontaine, who owned roughly a third of the private banking sector in Western Europe. The engagement had been announced 3 weeks ago. Selena had read about it on her phone at 7 in the morning while sitting on the edge of her bed and had sat very still for a long time after, waiting to feel something devastating, and had felt instead something unexpected, a low, cold clarity, like a window opening in winter. He had moved on. Or rather, he had moved upward. That was how Damien thought. People were positions to be obtained. She had thought she would not have to see him for a long time. She had been wrong. He spotted her 11 minutes after she arrived. She knew the exact moment because she watched his expression change. Not dramatically, not obviously, but she had spent 6 years reading his face the way sailors read weather. The slight stillness, the recalibration, and then the slow, practiced smile that meant he had already decided how this was going to go. She turned back to Gerald and kept her breathing even. She lasted another 40 minutes before Damien found a way to her. Gerald had stepped away to speak with a board member from a Swiss investment group, leaving Selina near one of the high cocktail tables with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched. She felt Damien before she heard him. That particular drop in ambient temperature that happened whenever he entered a space she was responsible for defending. Selina. She turned slowly. She had promised herself she would be slow, unhurried. She had rehearsed this in her bathroom mirror more times than she was comfortable admitting, on the off chance that they ever ended up in the same room. And she had told herself, slow, easy, unbothered, like seeing a coworker you barely remembered. Damien. Up close, he looked the same. That was the worst part. 6 years of what he had done to her, and he looked completely, infuriatingly the same. The dark hair slightly silvering at the temples in a way that read distinguished rather than aged. The jaw that could have been cast in bronze. The eyes that always seemed to be assessing the gap between what you thought you were worth and what he intended to pay. You look well, he said, and something in the way he said it suggested surprise. Thank you. I didn't know you'd be here tonight. I'm here with my employer, Marsh Capital. He nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. Still the secretary? She didn't flinch. She'd had 40 minutes to prepare for the word still used that way. Executive secretary, yeah. Yes. He smiled, the smile that meant he was ahead of her, or believed he was. Isabel and I are sitting at the Fontaine table. You should come say hello. She's heard about you. The words landed exactly the way he had intended them to, with weight, with implication, with the suggestion of a story she hadn't been part of telling. She's heard about you. Not I've mentioned you or she knows we were together. She's heard about you. As in, there were things that needed to be heard. As in, a version of Selina had already been distributed to Isabel Fontaine, and that version was probably not kind. I'm working tonight, Selina said. Give her my best. She started to turn away. His hand closed around her wrist. Not hard. That was the thing people never understood about Damien Cross. He was rarely hard. He was precise. The grip was firm enough to stop her without being forceful enough to attract attention. 200 people in the room, and not one of them would have seen it as anything except a man touching a woman's arm. Don't walk away from me, he said. Quiet, almost gentle. It's embarrassing. There it was, the center of everything. Not please stay or can we talk, just the calculus of his image. Her leaving was embarrassing to him. Her walking away, in public, in this dress she had been afraid to wear for 2 years, was a problem for his presentation. Let go of my wrist, she said. She kept her voice low and even. I'm trying to have a civil conversation. You're holding my arm without my permission. You're making a scene. She hadn't moved. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't done anything except ask him to let go. And somehow, in the architecture of Damien's logic, that was a scene she was making. She recognized the mechanics. She had lived inside them for 6 years, but knowing the trick didn't make the trap any easier to breathe through. She felt the old pull. The familiar drop into apology, into softening, into finding a way to make this easier for him so that he would release her and they could both pretend nothing had happened. She had been so good at that. 6 years of Olympic-level pretending. She was so deep inside that pull that she almost didn't hear the voice. There you are. It came from her left, low, unhurried, accented slightly. Italian, she would place it later, Northern Italian. The kind of careful elegance that comes from spending decades in rooms where the wrong word costs more than money. She turned, and the man standing beside her was not someone she recognized, but she understood immediately, from the way the nearest cluster of guests had subtly shifted their attention and then subtly looked away, that he was someone the room recognized. He was tall, not ostentatiously so, but enough that he looked down at Damien rather than across at him. Dark suit, no tie, which in a room full of black tie told her either he hadn't been informed of the dress code or he simply didn't feel the dress code applied to him. She would later learn it was the second thing. His face was angular and composed, the kind of face that did not give much away and seemed entirely comfortable with that. Dark eyes. A jaw that had probably broken someone's knuckles at some point. Mid-30s, she guessed, though he carried himself older, not in age, but in the specific gravity of a man who had made irrevocable decisions and was not haunted by them. He was looking at Damien's hand on her wrist with an expression of mild interest, the way someone might look at a small stain on an expensive tablecloth. "I've been looking for you," he said, still not to Damien, still to her, with an ease that was almost theatrical, except that nothing about him seemed theatrical. Everything seemed precise. "Come. There's someone I need you to meet." Damien's grip loosened. Not out of intimidation, she thought, but out of confusion. He was recalculating. She saw it happen, the slight furrow, the reassessment. "I'm sorry," Damien said, which was genuinely the first time she had heard those words from him in 6 years. "And you are?" The man looked at him then. Just looked. No answer immediately. A pause long enough to be intentional. "A friend of Selena's," he said finally, and then he offered her his arm. She should not have taken it. She took it. His arm was solid under her hand, and he moved through the crowd with the unhurried confidence of a man who expected the room to rearrange itself around him, and it did. She was aware of eyes following them and kept her chin level and her expression neutral and did not look back at Damien. They stopped near the far edge of the ballroom, beside a tall window that looked out over the lit grid of the city. No one was immediately around them. The man reached past her and set his own untouched glass of champagne on the windowsill. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was so unexpected, so simply direct, no performance in it, that she almost lost her composure for the first time all evening. She tightened her grip on her own glass instead. "Yes. Thank you. You didn't need the rescue." "No. I know." He said it without apology. "But you were about to do something that would have cost you more than it cost him, and that seemed like a bad trade." She looked at him fully for the first time. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you've been in that room before," he said. "Not this room. The other one. Where someone holds on to you just lightly enough that no one else believes it's a hold." The accuracy of that hit her somewhere behind the sternum. She looked back at the crowd. Damien had disappeared, which meant he was recalibrating, and that meant he would be back. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. Then, "Lucien Moretti." She knew the name, not from social circles. She had not run in his social circles, and she doubted many people did voluntarily. She knew the name from financial news, from the careful language journalists used when writing about him, from Gerald once saying, "Moretti's organization is in a different category of risk entirely," in a tone that suggested he was not speaking about investment risk. She knew the name the way you know the name of a country you would visit only under extraordinary circumstances. "Use me," he said. She turned. "What?" His expression was almost amused, but not quite. There was something too controlled about it to be amusement. "To upset your ex, you want to. He's watching from the third table left of the bar, and he's been watching since the moment we walked away together. Use me." He glanced across the room with an expression of patient boredom. "It costs you nothing, and it will cost him considerably more than nothing." She should have said no. She should have found Gerald, collected her coat, and gone home and eaten cereal and been sensible and safe. "And what does it cost you?" she asked instead. He looked back at her. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not obviously, but she had spent 6 years learning to read fine movements in faces, and she caught it. A flicker of something that was not amusement, and was not calculation, and was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable with itself. "Nothing yet," he said. Then the flicker was gone, replaced by the composed, faintly dangerous stillness she would come to understand was his default state. He said the next words in a different voice, quieter, more careful, the way you say something you mean rather than something you're performing. But understand one thing. His eyes did not move from her face. If you take my arm again tonight, you leave with me. Not forever. Not as anything you don't choose to be. He stopped. The pause was long enough to make sure she was hearing it. But you're staying with me. Tonight. She should have laughed. She almost did. That's very presumptuous. Yes. You don't know me. Also, yes. This is insane. Genuinely, he agreed. Take the arm or don't. Either way, I'll arrange for your ex to have a very bad next 15 minutes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked across the room. Damien was visible again, standing near Isabel now, his hand at the small of her back, his eyes, she was almost certain, still finding hers across the crowd, still measuring, still deciding what version of her to distribute next. She thought about the dress in the dry cleaning bag. She thought about the shower and the cereal and the 8 months of rebuilding herself one careful inch at a time and the things Damien had said at the end, in the apartment, when she'd finally told him she was leaving. You'll fall apart without me. You don't know how to function. You were nothing before me and you'll be nothing after. She had believed some of that. She was ashamed of how much she had believed it. She put her hand in the crook of Lucien Moretti's arm. One night, she said. He nodded once. One night. They walked back into the room together, and the crowd did what it always did around Lucien. It adjusted. People turned, then quickly turned back. Conversations paused and resumed at a slightly different register. And across the ballroom, Damien Cross watched Selina Hart move through a room on the arm of the one man in Europe he had absolutely no leverage over, and his jaw tightened by approximately 3 millimeters. Selina felt it from 40 feet away. She kept walking. She kept her hand steady and her shoulders level and her face completely, finally, convincingly unbothered. And somewhere in the shift of muscles required to pull off that particular lie, she felt something underneath it that was not a lie at all, something that was new and uncertain and slightly terrifying, and had absolutely nothing to do with making Damien Cross jealous. She would think about that later. She had a gala to survive first. The photographs appeared at 6:47 in the morning. Selina knew the exact time because she was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going cold beside her laptop, going through Gerald's Tuesday briefing notes. She had been awake since 5. She had not slept well. That was not new. Sleep had been in negotiation since long before Damien, and the night before had given her brain considerably more material than usual to chew through in the dark. Her phone lit up with a text from a coworker named Priya, who worked in investor relations and had the specific gift of being the first person in any office to know anything that was happening anywhere. Front page of the Meridian Financial section, also on Voss Report Online. Also, "Are you okay?" Selina put down her coffee and opened her browser. The photograph was taken from outside the gala entrance, angled slightly upward the way paparazzi shots always were, giving the image a particular kind of dramatic weight that the photographers understood better than their subjects. It showed the moment Lucien had guided her through the main doors at the end of the evening, her hand in the crook of his arm, her chin up, his face in three-quarter profile turned faintly toward her. The composition was, she had to admit, devastating. Not because it looked romantic, because it looked inevitable, the way pictures of powerful people always looked inevitable in retrospect, as if they had always been exactly where the camera found them. The headline on the Voss report read, "Moretti at Ashford Gala, and who is she?" The financial section was more restrained. Lucien Moretti makes rare public appearance. Mystery companion draws speculation. Her office phone started ringing at 8:15. She let it go to voicemail. Gerald called her personal cell at 8:22, which meant he had been in the office for less than 10 minutes and had already been briefed by someone. His first words were not good morning. "Selina, my office. Now." Gerald Marsh was 63 years old and had built Marsh Capital from a 2-person advisory firm into a mid-tier investment house with offices in 4 cities. He was not a cruel man. He was, however, a man who disliked surprises intensely and believed that his employees were, on some fundamental level, extensions of his professional reputation. He was standing when she walked in, which meant it was worse than she'd hoped. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap and kept her face neutral and waited, which was something she had become expert at, waiting for the shape of a thing before reacting to it. "Lucienne Moretti," Gerald said. "Yes." "You know who that is?" "I do now." He sat down heavily across from her. "Selina, the man's organization has been investigated by financial regulators in 6 countries. He is not someone whose name appearing next to the name of a Marsh Capital employee is—" He stopped, pressed his fingers to his temple. "How do you know him?" "I met him last night." "Last night?" "He helped me with a situation involving my ex-partner." She kept the sentence clean and simple. "He was polite. We left at the same time. The photograph is misleading." Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Gerald was not stupid, Bem. That was the thing about him. He saw through simplification faster than most people expected a man of his particular bluster to. "Damien Cross was at that gala," he said. She didn't answer. "He called me this morning." That hit her in a place she hadn't armored properly. She kept her expression still. "What did he say?" "He was concerned. He said you'd been behaving erratically since the relationship ended, that he'd tried to speak with you last night and you'd—" Gerald paused, and she could see him choosing his words with more care than usual, which meant Damien had been specific, become hostile and made a scene, and that your association with Moretti was, in his words, alarming. The room was very quiet for a moment. "Gerald," she said, "did I, at any point in the last 8 months, behave in a way that was erratic?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Did I miss a deadline? Lose a document? Say something inappropriate to a client? Arrive late?" She kept her voice even. Not hard, even, which was different. "I need you to actually think about that before you decide how much weight to give a phone call from a man who has no connection to this company." Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he exhaled. "No, you didn't. Then I'd appreciate it if we treated this the way we'd treat any external party calling to offer unsolicited opinions about your staff." He nodded, slowly. "All right. But Selina, be careful. Moretti's name attached to anything in this office is going to create questions I'd rather not answer." She said she understood. She went back to her desk. She sat down and stared at her monitor for approximately 45 seconds. And then she called the number on the card that had somehow appeared in the small clutch purse she'd carried the night before. She had no memory of him putting it there. She had a feeling that was intentional. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning." "He called my employer," she said. A pause. Short. "I know." "You know." I was informed an hour ago." His voice was unhurried. She was beginning to understand that unhurried was his baseline, not a performance. "He called 3 people. Your employer, a client of your employer's that your name is on a correspondence file with, and a journalist he has a relationship with at the Voss Report." The journalist. She thought about the headline, "Mystery Companion." The Voss Report piece was already being prepared before I could prevent it, but it's been redirected. The original version included your full name, your employer, and a quote from a source close to Damien Cross describing you as— He stopped. Another short pause. The wording was not kind. What did it say? "It's not the version that published." "I want to know what it said." A longer pause this time. "It described you as a former partner who had struggled significantly with the end of the relationship and was now making impulsive decisions that raised questions about your professional judgment." She absorbed that. She had known, in the abstract, that Damien was capable of this. She had known it the way you know a weather system is theoretically possible. You've read about it, you understand the conditions, but you don't entirely believe it until you're standing in it. "How did you redirect it?" she asked. "I suggested to the editor that the more interesting story was my attendance at the gala, not my companion. Your attendance was the interesting story, regardless." "Yes, but it gave them something to print without your name in it." A brief pause. "I also spoke with your employer's client directly, and clarified that any concerns about Marsh Capital staff were unfounded, and that I would be personally unimpressed if the relationship was disrupted. She sat very still. "You can't do that." "I just did." "Lucien." She said his name for the first time, and it felt strange in her mouth. Too familiar, and not familiar enough, both at once. "I didn't ask you to do any of that. I can handle Damien." "I know you can." "Then why?" "Because you shouldn't have to." The words were simple and direct, and carried no performance. "Not for something I contributed to. The photograph exists because of me. The attention exists because of me. That's a debt I owe you, and I pay my debts." She pressed her fingers flat against her desk. "I'm not one of your debts." "No," he said. "You're not." That was a poor choice of words. Another pause, genuinely brief this time, like he was editing something before it arrived. "I owe you an apology for the phrasing, but the actions stand." She didn't know what to do with that. She had spent 6 years with a man who never apologized and never explained and certainly never distinguished between poor phrasing and poor intent. The simple revision, that was poor wording, here is the correction, landed somewhere between disarming and suspicious, and she sat with both reactions simultaneously, not sure which to trust. "We should meet," she said finally, "if you want to explain whatever this is. Tonight. I'll send an address." She almost said yes. "Somewhere public," she said instead. "My choice of location." A pause that might have been amusement. "Your choice." She picked a restaurant 3 blocks from her apartment, mid-range, well-lit, the kind of place where the tables were close enough together that no one could make a scene without an audience. She texted the address. She went back to Gerald's briefing notes. She spent the rest of the day answering questions from Priya and 2 other co-workers with the careful vagueness of someone who understood that partial information spread faster than silence. At lunch, she found a voicemail from Damien. She listened to it once, standing in the small break room with her back to the door. His voice was calm. That was always how she knew he was furious, that the calibration of the calm, the way it went almost too smooth, like still water over a very fast current. "Selena, I want you to think about what you're doing. I'm trying to protect you. Moretti is not a man you want to be associated with, and the fact that you left with him last night suggests that you haven't been making good decisions. I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it because regardless of how things ended between us, I still care about your well-being. Call me." She deleted the voicemail. She went back to her desk. She did not call. The restaurant that evening was called Trevi's, and it was busy enough that the hostess gave Lucien Moretti a table in the middle of the room without recognizing him, which Selena suspected did not happen to him often. He was already there when she arrived, 5 minutes early, in a dark jacket and no tie, reading something on his phone with the unaffected focus of someone who was not performing patience. He stood when she approached. That was the first thing she clocked. He stood automatically, without calculation, the way men from a certain generation or a certain upbringing stood when a woman arrived at a table. Not theatrical, just done. "You look like you had a bad day," he said. "That's not a great opening." "Would you prefer I pretend otherwise?" She sat down. "No, I had a bad day." She picked up the menu. "He left me a voicemail." "I know what it said." She looked up. "You're monitoring my phone?" "No." He said it without defensiveness. "I know what he says because I know the pattern, the calm voice, the framing of concern, the suggestion that your judgment is impaired while his remains objective." He looked at the menu with the same unhurried focus he seemed to bring to everything. "It's a very specific playbook. Men like him don't improvise." She put the menu down. "How do you know men like him?" He met her eyes. "Because I have employed men like him, and fired them." A pause. "And in 2 cases, done considerably worse than fired them." She decided to let that sit without prodding it. "He's going to keep going," she said. "He called Gerald. He's talking to the Voss journalist. She stopped and pressed her thumb against the edge of the table. "He's building something. I just don't know what the full shape of it is yet." "I do," Lucien said. She waited. "He wants you to come back to him. Not because he loves you, I don't believe he's capable of that in the conventional sense, but because you're leaving represents a miscalculation on his part. He didn't expect you to survive the exit, and then he didn't expect you to build something afterward, and now he absolutely did not expect you to walk out of a ballroom on the arm of someone he can't touch. A pause. That last part is new information that significantly accelerated his timeline. What timeline? The waiter arrived. Lucien ordered without looking at the menu, something in Italian that she didn't catch. She ordered the salmon, which she didn't particularly want, because it was the first thing she saw when the pressure of the moment made the menu blur slightly. The waiter left. He's going to start targeting your professional credibility directly, Lucien said. The rumor that you're unstable is the setup. The next move will be something more concrete, something that looks like evidence. He can't fabricate evidence. He fabricates narratives. Evidence follows narratives in the circles he operates in. He picked up his water glass. I've been in those circles longer than he has. I know how the architecture works. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you helping me? He considered the question, which she appreciated. He didn't deflect or offer a clean answer immediately. Because I put you in a more exposed position than you were in before, he said finally. And because... He stopped, set the glass down. And because I find that I want to. That was the second thing she hadn't been prepared for. The first had been the apology that morning. The second was this, a man who, when asked a direct question, gave a direct answer that included something inconveniently honest about his own motivation. I have conditions, she said. I assumed you would. I keep my apartment. I keep my job. I control my own money. I'm not... She stopped. I'm not a person who needs to be installed in someone else's life. I'm not looking for that. If we're doing whatever this is, it has to be on terms I set and can leave whenever I choose. He nodded. Write them down. I'll sign them. She blinked. You'll sign them. If that's what makes it real to you, yes. I have lawyers. You can have your own lawyers review it. He picked up his fork. I've run organizations where every agreement exists on paper. It's not insulting to me. It's practical. She sat back in her chair and looked at him, and tried to locate the angle. The place where this became what she expected, what she recognized. The place where a man who seemed patient and reasonable revealed the frame he'd been building all along. She had been wrong before. She had been spectacularly, expensively wrong before. And she was aware that the very qualities in Lucien that seemed trustworthy were the kind of qualities a sufficiently skilled manipulator could synthesize. I don't trust you, she said. Good, he said. You shouldn't. Not yet. She ate her salmon. It was better than she'd expected. They talked for 2 hours. Not about arrangements or agreements, but about work, about Gerald, about a documentary she'd watched recently that he'd also seen, about a city she'd visited once for a conference and he'd lived in for 3 years. The conversation moved without effort in a way that felt almost suspicious for that reason alone. The way a thing that comes too easily always carries a small warning light. At the end of the evening, outside the restaurant on the sidewalk where cabs moved past in both directions, she said, 2 weeks. That's what I'm offering. 2 public appearances. You get to soften whatever image you think needs softening. I get you backing Damien off my professional life. 3 weeks, he said. Why 3? Because 2 isn't enough time for anything to feel real. And Damien Cross is not a man who responds to things that don't feel real. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Fine. 3 weeks. I'll have conditions written up by Thursday. I'll have my lawyers available Friday. She turned to hail a cab. One stopped almost immediately, which never happened to her normally, and she didn't look back to see whether that was coincidence or arrangement. She got in. She gave her address. She sat in the back of the cab watching the city go by through smudged glass. And she thought about the waiter at Trevi's who had told her, unprompted, that the salmon was particularly good that evening, and she wondered whether Lucien had anything to do with that either. Probably not. Probably the salmon was just good. She didn't fully trust probably. The conditions went through 4 drafts over 2 days. Her neighbor's daughter was a paralegal and owed Selena a favor, and she read through everything on a Thursday night at Selena's kitchen table with a glass of wine and a red pen and made 3 small suggestions. Selena incorporated all 3. She sent the document to Lucien's lawyer Friday morning and had a signed copy returned by Friday afternoon with no modifications. 0, not 1. and a handwritten note on the covering page in a precise, slightly left-leaning script that said simply, "All terms accepted. The choice to leave remains yours. LM." She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk at home. She didn't know why she did that. The first public appearance was a business dinner at the Holt Carlton, smaller than the gala, more intimate. 60 people from the overlap between legitimate finance and the particular shadowed world Lucian occupied. Selina wore black, her own choice, a dress she'd bought 2 months ago that she'd liked on the hanger and then been afraid to wear for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate. She wore it without asking anyone's opinion. Lucian met her outside. He looked at the dress exactly once without commenting and said, "Are you ready?" And she said yes, and they went in. The evening was a demonstration in contrasts. Every person who approached Lucian moved with a certain caution that she recognized as the specific quality of people who were not sure where they stood with him. Men who laughed a half beat too quickly. Women who kept their expressions careful. One older man who gripped Lucian's hand in both of his and spoke in fast, low Italian, while his eyes slid to Selina with a question in them that was not politely concealed. Lucian answered that man in English, deliberately, she realized, so she could hear it. "She's with me," he said. "That's all you need to know." Between conversations, he touched the small of her back exactly once, briefly, to redirect her toward a more comfortable position in a cluster of people, and then dropped his hand immediately. She noticed the drop. It wasn't nothing. At 11 o'clock, when the dinner was winding toward its end, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "How much is he paying you?" "Everyone knows you're doing this to make me look bad. Go home, Selina. This ends badly for you." She read it twice, put her phone away, finished her conversation with a woman from a Swiss asset management firm who was genuinely interesting and had a dry sense of humor Selina found she liked. She showed Lucian the message in the car after. He read it once. His expression did not change in any way that she could have described precisely. It was more like a temperature drop, a shift in the quality of the stillness around him. "That's from one of his numbers," he said. "Unregistered, but he used the same carrier. My people traced it in 11 minutes. Your people trace things. Constantly." He handed the phone back. "He's escalating faster than I expected." He paused. "Which means something changed for him." "What changed?" "You didn't go home," Lucian said. "You should have gone home and been shaken, and instead you finished dinner and spoke with Elise Brower for 40 minutes and seemed, by all accounts, to be having a reasonably good time." He looked out the window. "He doesn't know what to do with you having a reasonably good time." She almost smiled. "Neither do I, honestly." 3 days later, she arrived at the Marsh Capital offices on a Monday morning and found that the executive floor had been accessed over the weekend. She knew something was wrong before she reached her desk. There was a particular quality of stillness in the corridor that didn't belong to the early morning, a wrongness she felt before she identified its source. Then she turned the corner and she understood. Painted across the length of the executive corridor wall, in large, red, uneven letters that had dripped slightly at the ends of each stroke, "You still belong to me." Selina stood in the corridor for a long time, long enough for the building's security officer to arrive, and then a coworker, and then Gerald, who came in still wearing his coat and looked at the wall and said nothing for a moment that lasted approximately 10 seconds, which was the longest she had ever seen Gerald go without speaking. "Call the police," Gerald said. "Already called," security said. Selina looked at the wall. She thought about the dress in the dry cleaning bag. She thought about the voicemail. She thought about 6 years of being told, in 1,000 different registers, what she belonged to and who decided that and why her opinion on the matter was irrelevant. She took out her phone and called Lucian. He answered before the first ring completed. "I know," he said. "I'm already in the car." "Don't come here," she said. "Selina, don't come here," she said again, quiet and clear. "I'm handling this." A pause. Then, "All right, but I need something from you." "Name it." She looked at the red letters. They were starting to make her angry rather than afraid, which was new. The shift from fear to anger was a recent development in her life, and one she was still learning to navigate without overcorrecting. "I need everything you have on Damien Cross's current financial dealings. Everything that connects to your world." The pause this time was longer. "Why?" Because this isn't about me anymore, she said. It hasn't been for a while. He came after my employer. He's inside our building. He's escalating in ways that don't make sense unless he needs something specific. She turned away from the wall. I work for an investment firm. I have access to confidential corporate files. I've had that access for 8 months. She walked toward the window at the end of the corridor. Whatever he wants, I think it's in those files. Lucian was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was, she had already learned, his version of urgent concern. Selina, he said, if that's true, then this stopped being about jealousy a long time ago. I know, she said. And if it stopped being about jealousy, then I'm not the target, she said. I'm the access point. Outside the window, the city went on at its own pace, indifferent to the red letters drying on the wall behind her, indifferent to the particular cold certainty settling into her chest as she finally understood the full shape of what Damien Cross had been building, not toward her return, not toward her humiliation, but toward something that had been in motion long before the gala, long before the photograph, long before Lucian Moretti offered her his arm in a ballroom and changed the geometry of everything. She had been the door all along, and she had just realized someone had been picking the lock for 8 months. The police took 3 hours. 3 hours of photographs and statements, and a detective named Rourke, who kept writing things down in a small notebook with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned not to show what he was thinking, which Selina appreciated even as it exhausted her. Gerald hovered at the edge of every conversation without inserting himself into it, which was his version of support. The other early arrivals, 4 people from the analyst team, 1 from compliance, were sent to work from the conference room on the floor below. Nobody mentioned the wall directly after the first 10 minutes. They all moved around it the way you move around something you don't know how to categorize yet. Detective Rourke asked her twice whether she had any idea who might have done this. She said no both times. That was technically accurate. She had a very strong hypothesis. She did not yet have what Rourke would need, and she understood the difference between the two things in a way that 6 years with a corporate attorney had made absolutely clear to her. After the police left, after Gerald had gone into his office and closed the door, after the building's facilities team had arrived with a tarp and a consultation about paint removal, Selina went to her desk, opened her computer, and began a very careful, very quiet review of every confidential file she had legitimate access to as Gerald Marsh's executive secretary. She had access to more than most people realized. That was the thing about being good at your job without drawing attention to the scale of your competence. Nobody audited your clearance level because nobody thought about your clearance level. She could see internal correspondence between Gerald and the board. She could see draft merger proposals. She could see due diligence files on companies Marsh Capital was considering acquiring or partnering with. She started with the ones from the last 8 months, the period that coincided exactly with her employment. She worked through lunch. She worked through the afternoon while the facilities team argued quietly in the corridor about whether the paint had penetrated the plaster. She cross-referenced company names against a list she had started building in a notebook, a plain green notebook she'd bought from the supply closet that morning specifically for this purpose, because she wanted the information to exist somewhere that was not on any network device. At 4:17 in the afternoon, she found the first thread. It was inside a due diligence packet for a company called Veltrade Partners, a mid-size logistics firm that Marsh Capital had considered acquiring 14 months ago, before she was employed there. The acquisition had fallen through at the final stage. The notes in the file cited undisclosed liabilities and a failure to verify ownership structure. Veltrade Partners' registered agent was a law firm called Cross, Halloran & Associates, Damien's firm. She wrote it in the notebook. She kept her handwriting small and level. She found the second thread an hour later. A shell company called Arkin Global Consulting appeared in 2 separate due diligence files and 1 internal investment memo. In each instance, Arkin had been listed as a minority stakeholder in the company under review. In each instance, the deal had either stalled or fallen apart. The connection to Arkin was noted in each file as a flag, but never fully resolved. Arkin Global Consulting was registered in Delaware. Its sole director, according to a footnote in the compliance file, was an entity called Meridian Horizon LLC. Selina already knew who owned Meridian Horizon LLC. She had found it in the 3rd search she'd run on Lucian's organization when she'd spent 40 minutes on her couch the week before, convincing herself she was just being thorough. Meridian Horizon, LLC, was a subsidiary of the Moretti Financial Network. She sat with that for a long time. The facilities team finished for the day. The floor went quiet. Outside the window, the city was going orange and purple at the edges, and the light through the glass made long shadows across her desk and across the green notebook and across her hands, which she noticed were very still. She thought about what she knew. Then she thought about what it meant. Then she thought about those two things being different and what the distance between them might contain. She called Lucien at 6:45. He answered immediately. "Are the police finished?" "Hours ago." She looked at the notebook. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Not careful. Straight." A pause that was not quite the 3-second version. Shorter, tighter. "All right. Do you have a financial interest in companies that have been involved in failed acquisitions by Marsh Capital in the last 18 months? The pause this time was the full 3 seconds, then 4. She counted. "Yes," he said. One word, flat and clean, the way he said things he had decided not to dress up. She closed her eyes, opened them. "How many?" 3 separate entities. Indirect interest in each. Not majority, not controlling, but present. And Damien Cross. His firm is the registered agent for 2 of the 3. "So you're—" She stopped, recalibrated. "You and Damien are connected. We are connected through a financial structure that neither of us built directly." His voice was careful now, in a way it hadn't been before, but careful in the sense of precision rather than evasion. "I inherited the Arkan position from my predecessor's network. I was aware of it. I have been in the process of unwinding it." "How long have you known about the Marsh Capital connection?" Another pause. 6 weeks? The word landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Not an explosion. A drop, and then the rings spreading outward, each one touching something she'd thought was solid. 6 weeks, she said. "Selina? 6 weeks before the gala, or 6 weeks including the gala?" "Including. I became aware of the Arkan Marsh overlap approximately 6 weeks ago, which was 2 weeks before the Ashford event." She stood up. She did not remember deciding to stand. She was at the window now, looking at the city going dark, and her reflection looked back at her from the glass, steady, pale, utterly unreadable, which she found she resented slightly because she did not feel steady. "Were you at the gala because of me?" she asked. "No." Immediate. "I was at the gala because Philip Ashford is a financial connection I maintain for other reasons. I did not know you would be there. I did not know your connection to Damien Cross until the moment I saw his hand on your wrist and recognized his name when I asked afterward. And after you knew, after I knew, I made a choice. To insert yourself. To offer help. You had the option to decline. Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't reduce it to my option to decline. You knew there was a financial entanglement connecting your network to my employer's files, and you knew Damien Cross had a connection to that entanglement, and you still—" She pressed her free hand flat against the glass. "Did you think I was useful to you?" The pause was long enough that she felt it physically, the length of it sitting in the space between them. "In the first 2 days," he said, "I considered whether you might have access to information relevant to the Arkan situation. I considered it, and then I dismissed it. And I want you to know the order of those things. I considered, and then I dismissed, not the reverse." "Why should I believe that?" "You shouldn't. Not because I'm lying, because you have no way to verify it, and you're smart enough to know that." A brief pause. "But I'll tell you what you can verify. I signed your conditions without modification. I have not once asked you about your work or your employer's files. I have not directed any conversation toward Marsh Capital's internal operations. I have not used our arrangement to access anything through you." She stood at the window. The city outside was fully dark now, the grid of light that never really went out, the particular restlessness of a city that ran on money and didn't sleep. "He's not trying to get me back," she said. It wasn't a question anymore. She was thinking out loud, working the shape of it. "He never was. He wants what's in those files, information about the companies connected to Arkin, about the Moretti network's indirect positions. If he gets that, he gets leverage, Lucienne said quietly. Over me. And over the legitimate acquisition processes at Marsh Capital, which gives him the ability to redirect or block certain deals, which has a very specific financial value to the people funding him. Who's funding him? People who would benefit from knowing the exact structure of my legitimate holdings. A pause. Competitors. Regulators in specific pockets. Individuals whose relationship with my organization ended badly and who have been building something for approximately 2 years. She absorbed all of that. You've been tracking this? Yes. And you didn't tell me. I was trying to resolve it without involving you further than I already had. That was not your decision to make, she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. You sat across from me at Trevi's and you signed my conditions, and one of those conditions was that I remain free to make my own choices. You cannot protect me by withholding the information I need to make them. Silence. You're right, he said. No qualification, no pivot. Just that. She turned away from the window, picked up the green notebook. I'm coming to you, tonight, and you're going to show me everything you have on Arkin and Damien Cross and whoever is behind this, all of it. Selina, I have to tell you something first. The quality of his voice changed. Not dramatically, just a fractional shift in the precision of it, the kind of shift that meant what came next had weight. There's a complication, he said. Since this morning. She waited. My people flagged a movement in Damien's pattern. He transferred funds, a specific amount, to an account we've been watching. That account belongs to a private security contractor. The transfer is consistent with what we'd expect if he was a pause. Acquiring personnel, short term. Purpose unknown. She understood what acquiring personnel meant. She had learned enough in the last 3 weeks to understand what that phrasing covered. He's hired people, she said. 4, possibly 5 individuals. Ex-military contractor profile. Arrived in the city in the last 48 hours. The room felt very still. For what purpose? We don't know yet, but Selina... His voice dropped by almost nothing, just enough that she heard the change. We need to move faster than I planned. She was already at her desk, closing the notebook, shutting down her computer with the specific focused efficiency she'd developed over 8 months of managing a man's professional life under pressure. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was there in 35. Lucienne's city residence was not what she'd expected, which she realized meant she'd had expectations, which she filed away to examine later. It was a building in the financial district. High floors, understated exterior, the kind of place that did not announce what it was. The lobby had a desk and 2 men who stood when she came in and knew her name before she gave it, which was either reassuring or alarming, and she chose not to decide which. Upstairs, the apartment was large and spare and had the quality of a space that was lived in seriously rather than decorated. Books stacked on actual surfaces, a jacket over a chair, coffee cups that suggested the kitchen was used for something besides aesthetics. Lucienne was at a long table near the windows with a laptop and 3 physical files open when she came in, and he stood, and she waved him back down. Show me, she said. He showed her. For the next 2 hours, they went through everything. The Arkin structure, the shell companies layered underneath it, the connections to Damien's firm, the connections from Damien's firm to 3 individuals whose names appeared in financial intelligence reports that Lucienne's network had compiled over the past 18 months. The scale of it was larger than she'd expected. Not massive, not the kind of thing that made international news, but precisely engineered. The kind of financial architecture that was built by someone who understood the gaps in regulatory oversight and how to slide things through them. He's not the architect, Selina said, at some point after midnight, with a cold cup of coffee beside her and the green notebook open in front of her now with pages of her own handwriting connecting the threads. No, Lucian said. He's the mechanism. Someone built this and gave him the role that uses his existing access, the legal firm, the regulatory relationships, the cover of legitimate practice. Yes. Who? Lucian tapped one of the physical files. A man named Carver, Reuben Carver, former regulatory official, currently a private consultant whose client list does not appear on any public disclosure. She looked at the name. You've been building a case against Carver for 14 months, and Damien is the link between Carver and the Marsh Capital files. Yes, Damien's firm processed the legal structures. Damien's personal connection to you put him in proximity to the specific access point, your position, your clearance level, without anyone needing to explain why a former romantic partner might be in contact with a Marsh Capital employee. She thought about that for a moment, the specific cold architecture of it. He didn't start dating me because of the job. No. I believe the relationship predates the arrangement with Carver by several years. But when the opportunity aligned, he adapted it, Lucian said, which tells you something about how he thinks about the people in his life. She already knew how Damien thought about the people in his life. She had just, until tonight, believed she was the exception. She was not the exception. She had been, without knowing it, an asset in a plan she had never been told about. 6 years of her life had been spent inside a strategy whose actual purpose she had been the last person on Earth to understand. She sat with that for approximately 45 seconds. Then she moved forward. The accountant, she said. Lucian looked at her. Martin Foss, your senior accountant at Moretti Holdings. He was auditing the Arkan positions, you said. He's the one who flagged the Marsh Capital overlap. Yes. Where is he now? Lucien's phone was already in his hand before she finished the question. He made a call. Short, in Italian, low-voiced. He listened for 7 seconds. He put the phone down. He didn't come in this morning, Lucien said. His voice was flat in a way it had not been before. She looked at him. He called in sick, but his car is gone and his phone goes to voicemail and his building's security footage shows him leaving at 2 a.m. with a pause. With someone else beside him. Not willingly. The camera angle doesn't show. Lucien. She put her hands flat on the table. If they have Martin Foss, they have the one person who can testify to the full scope of the Arkan structure from the inside of my organization. And if they have him, they control the timeline, she said. They control whether this ever goes to the right people or whether it gets buried in whatever deal Carver is running. She stood up. The chair scraped back. She walked to the window and looked at the city and thought about Martin Foss, who she had never met, who was somewhere in that city right now because he had been doing his job and had seen too much and had the misfortune of being the most valuable piece on a board whose other players played considerably rougher than auditors were prepared for. She thought about 6 years of being controlled without knowing the full shape of the control. She thought about the red letters on the wall. She thought about the voicemail and the smooth, patient concern in Damien's voice and the contractors he had paid for and the warehouse district she had seen referenced twice in the Arkan files. A logistics holding registered to a shell, registered to another shell, at an address in the port district that had appeared on no active business documentation for 11 months. I know where they are, she said. Lucien was very still behind her. The port district address in the Arkan subsidiary files. The logistics holding. She turned around. He needs somewhere isolated to keep Foss while he figures out the next move. Somewhere his contractors can operate without oversight. That address has been sitting dormant for almost a year. No business activity, but the utilities are still running. You pay to maintain a space you're planning to use. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. You could be wrong. I could be, she said, but you're going to check it tonight regardless. Yes. He was already picking up his phone again. And then I'm going in, she said. He stopped. Not your people, not a team of whatever they are. She crossed her arms. Me. I go in and I talk to Damien and I get Foss out. Selena. He wants me, she said. That's the one consistent truth in all of this. Whatever else he's running, whatever Carver told him to do, his personal obsession with getting me back is real. It's the only thing that's genuinely his in this whole operation. She looked at Lucien steadily. Which means it's the only lever I have. It's not a lever, it's a liability. I know what he could do. Her voice didn't shake. She was a little surprised that it didn't, actually. I've known what he could do for 6 years. I've been afraid of it for most of that time. She picked up the green notebook. I'm not afraid of it right now. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the silence of two people recognizing the limits of their respective influence over each other, which was its own uncomfortable kind of honesty. I want a transmitter, she said. I want encrypted copies of everything we've put together tonight on 3 separate drives. And I want your people close enough to move the moment I give the signal. And if you can't give the signal, then use your judgment. She met his eyes. But until that moment, this is my choice to make. You signed a document that says so. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she watched something move through his expression. Not quite fear, because she was not sure that was something Lucien Moretti did in the conventional sense, but something adjacent to it, something that had to do with a person he did not want to lose standing in front of him and telling him she was going somewhere he could not follow. All right, he said. All right, she said. Outside, somewhere in the Port District, in a building that was registered to a company that did not exist, a man named Martin Foss was waiting for something to change, and Damien Cross was making whatever calculation came next, and the city went on doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, full of people who had no idea that in one apartment near the financial district, a woman who had spent 6 years learning to be small was sitting across from a man who had spent a lifetime being feared, and between them on a table covered in documents was the shape of a decision that could not be unmade. She had been the door all along. Tonight, she was going to be the one who opened it. The transmitter was the size of a coat button. Lucian's technical man, a quiet, compact person named Soren, who had the specific energy of someone who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing, pressed it into the lining of Selina's jacket collar at 2:45 in the morning with the precision of a tailor making a final adjustment. He tested it twice. He told her the range was 300 meters and the signal would cut through concrete, and then he looked at her with an expression that was entirely professional and said, "Don't let it get wet." She said she would try. Lucien's people had confirmed the address in the Port District within 90 minutes of her identifying it. 2 advanced scouts moved quietly into position in the surrounding blocks, reported lights in the upper loading bay of the warehouse and 1 vehicle, a dark panel van, in the rear service alley. Thermal imaging from a device Selina decided not to ask too many questions about showed 3 heat signatures inside. 1 stationary on the ground floor, 2 mobile on the upper level. Martin Foss, she thought, was the one on the ground floor. Damien would be above. She had 3 encrypted drives in an interior pocket of the jacket, copies of everything from the table, the full Arkan structure, the shell company documentation, the names, the accounts, the 14 months of financial intelligence that Lucian had spent building. She had sent a 4th copy to an encrypted server whose access credentials she had emailed to Detective Rourke at 2 in the morning with a message that said, "Do not access this until you hear from me or until 24 hours have passed. Then access it regardless." She had no idea whether Rourke would follow those instructions. She thought he probably would. He had struck her as a man who followed instructions that made procedural sense, and a time-locked evidence server made procedural sense. She rode to the Port District in a car with Soren and 1 other of Lucien's people. A tall woman named Dasha, who said nothing the entire ride and checked a firearm twice with the methodical ease of someone performing a routine task. Selina did not have a firearm. She had the drives, the transmitter, and the particular cold clarity that had been building in her chest since she'd stood at the window of Lucian's apartment and named what she was going to do. She was not calm, exactly. Calm was the wrong word for it. It was more like the feeling of having already made the irreversible decision and being on the other side of the making of it, where there was nothing left to deliberate about. Lucien had stood at the car door. He did not tell her to be careful. He did not tell her what to do inside. He looked at her for a moment, the city behind him, and his expression doing that thing it did where very little showed on the surface and considerably more was present underneath. "If the signal cuts out," he said, "I don't wait. I know. If you hear 3 short bursts of static in your earpiece, that means we're moving regardless of the signal." "Understood." He nodded once. Then, "Selina." She looked at him. He didn't say anything else for a moment. just looked at her with the specific directness he brought to everything, not performing composure, just being it, the way some people simply occupied whatever space they were in without apology or display. "I know," she said again, quieter this time. She got in the car. The warehouse was a long, low building at the end of a service road that ran parallel to the water, the kind of industrial architecture that existed in every port district of every major city in the world, functional, anonymous, built for moving things rather than housing them, with loading bays wide enough for trucks and walls thick enough that whatever happened inside stayed inside. The lights she could see from the road were not bright, just the particular orange-gray glow of a space that was lit from inside, but not for any purpose that invited attention. Soren dropped her 1 block out. He told her the earpiece frequency and confirmed the transmitter was live. He said nothing else. She got out of the car on a street that smelled like water and diesel, and the specific cold of a city at 3 in the morning when the temperature drops to where breath shows. She walked. The side entrance was a personnel door beside the main loading bay. Heavy steel, industrial lock, the kind of door that expected to be ignored. She knocked on it with the specific rhythm Lucien's scouts had identified as the pattern used in the last 2 hours. 3 slow, 2 fast. He'd told her Damien was precise in his habits. Precise people used patterns without thinking about it. The door opened. The man who opened it was wide at the shoulders and expressionless, and looked at her for exactly 2 seconds before something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, she thought, or at least the specific recalibration of a man who had been told a name and was now matching it to a face. "He said you might come," the man said. "Then he shouldn't be surprised," she said. He stepped back. She went in. The interior of the warehouse was cold and smelled of concrete and old machine oil, and something underneath both of those things that she placed after a moment, as the particular smell of a space where people had been existing without adequate ventilation. Stale breath, stress, the human smell of hours trapped somewhere. The ground floor was a wide-open bay with structural columns at regular intervals and empty pallet racks along the walls, and the kind of industrial silence that wasn't quite silence because of the building's mechanical systems running somewhere beneath everything. The man led her toward a metal staircase at the far end. She heard Martin Foss before she saw him. A cough, short and genuine, not performative, the kind of cough that came from hours in a cold building without enough water. She turned toward it and saw him in the far corner of the ground floor, seated on an overturned crate, his hands not bound, which told her something about how confident Damien was in the situation's containment. Foss was in his mid-50s, compact, wearing what had probably been a good suit yesterday and was now a disheveled one. He looked up at her approach, and his expression moved through surprise and then something that was closer to careful assessment than relief. "Are you all right?" she said, quietly enough that it didn't carry upstairs. "Physically." His voice was rough from the cough. "They haven't touched me, but I haven't been able to reach anyone, and my phone is," he gestured vaguely, "gone." "I know where you are," she said. "Other people know where you are." She looked at him steadily. "Do you have anything with you? Any documentation, any device?" He tapped his chest. An inside pocket. "A drive. I put everything on it before I left my building. I always keep a backup drive." He paused. "Habit." She felt something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. "Hold on to it. Don't give it to anyone who comes through that door except a police officer or someone who tells you the name Rourke." "Rourke." "Yes." The guard called from the base of the stairs. "That's enough." She straightened, turned toward the stairs. Took a breath that was slower than it needed to be, which was the closest she had to a preparatory ritual. She went up. The upper level was a long, open loading bay with a high ceiling and 2 rows of overhead lights, only half of them functioning, which threw the space into alternating bands of light and shadow. At the far end, near the loading platform that opened onto a freight elevator shaft that had not been operational in years, Damien Cross was standing with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was a studied casualness she had seen him deploy before. The suggestion of a man relaxed and in control of his environment. There were 2 other men in the space, positioned near the walls, the same contractor profile Lucien had described. Damien looked at her when she came up the stairs, and something happened in his face that she had seen before, and had spent 8 months trying to name accurately. It was not love. She was certain it was not love. It was the particular expression of a man who has lost a thing and has been waiting to confirm that the thing is still, fundamentally, his. "You came," he said. "You have Martin Foss downstairs." "He's fine." "I know he's fine. I just confirmed that myself." She moved into the light. She kept her hands visible and her pace even. "Let him go. Let's talk first." "There's nothing to talk about until he's out of the building." Damien's expression shifted slightly. Not anger yet, just the early stage of it, the tightening at the corners of his jaw that she had learned to read as a precursor. "You came here alone." "Yes." "Selina." He said her name the way he always had, with the particular weight of someone who believed names were a form of ownership. "I know you have drives. I know you've been going through the Marsh Capital files. That's what I need." "I know what you need." "Then give them to me and this is over tonight. Foss walks out. You walk out. Everything from the last 3 weeks gets quietly resolved and you go back to your life." She looked at him. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the shower and the cereal and the 8 months of building. She thought about the dress and the dry cleaning bag and the notebook and Rourke and the encrypted server and the particular moment at the window in Lucien's apartment when the full shape of everything had finally become clear. "You never wanted me back," she said. He didn't answer. "You wanted the access, the whole time, the voicemails, the rumors, the wall." "That wasn't obsession. That was pressure. You were trying to make me desperate enough to reach out, to come back because a woman who came back voluntarily was a woman you could use without anyone asking why." Something moved in Damien's expression, not admission, but the specific stillness of a man who has been seen and is deciding what to do about it. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "I know." "The drives, Selina." "No." He took 3 steps toward her, slow, deliberate, the specific measured movement of a man who had learned that the approach itself was a form of pressure. "You don't understand what you're protecting. Moretti is not a good man. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's shown you of himself in the last 3 weeks, it's a performance. He builds performances. It's what his entire network runs on." "And yours?" He stopped. "You built a 6-year performance," she said. "You're very good at it. But Lucien showed me everything about Arkin and Carver and the shell structure, and the difference between what you're building and what he's building is that he showed it to me, voluntarily, knowing I might walk. He showed it to you because he needed you to do exactly this." Damien's voice had gone careful and smooth, the voicemail voice. "He used you, Selina. He needed someone Carver's people wouldn't expect at this door, someone with access to the Marsh files. Someone who could come here without a team behind them because I wouldn't shoot a woman I was trying to get back." "Stop." The word came out flat and clean. "Just stop." He stopped. "I know you won't shoot me," she said. "You need the drives intact, and you need my access codes, and you need me functional. That's the only reason I walked up those stairs. Not because Lucien sent me, because I understood the math." His jaw tightened, not the early stage tightening, the real thing. "Give me the drives," he said. "Let Foss go first." "That's not how this works. It's the only way this works." She didn't move. "Because the alternative is that you take them from me by force, which damages the drives and means you get nothing usable, and which is the last kind of evidence anyone needs added to a server that Detective Rourke already has access credentials for." The name hit him. She watched it. The fractional widening, the rapid recalibration. Rourke. A name he recognized from somewhere. She had hoped he would. "You went to the police." "I went to one detective 4 hours ago, with a time lock." She held his gaze. 24 hours, or he hears from me, after which the server opens regardless." The silence was absolute. The 2 contractors near the walls had not moved, but she was aware of them with the specific awareness that comes from understanding that a room's geometry matters, that the distance between herself and the stairs behind her and the men on either side of her was information she needed to maintain at all times. "You planned this," Damien said. He was not entirely furious yet. He was at the stage just before it, which was sometimes more dangerous. "You came in here with a plan." "Yes." "Who's outside?" She didn't answer. Moretti. He said the name differently than he said hers, with a specific loathing that was not personal in the way his loathing of things was usually personal, but systemic. The loathing of a man who had been operating in a shadow he thought was his own and had discovered it belonged to someone else. He's outside. Let Foss go, she said. And let me call Rourke. And whatever you've done before tonight stays manageable. There are lawyers who can work with what you've built. There are deals to be made. But not if you don't know what Carver does to people who make deals, Damien said. It was the first real thing he had said. She heard it, underneath the performance, underneath the smooth and the measured, the first thing that came from something genuine, which was fear. Not of her, not of Lucien, of the man behind the architecture. Then help us get to Carver, she said. He looked at her. That's the deal. Foss goes free. You cooperate. Rourke gets everything tonight, including your testimony about Carver's structure. She kept her voice low and level. That's the only version of tonight where you don't go down for all of it. The silence stretched. It stretched long enough that she was aware of her own heartbeat, which had not been elevated until this moment. The adrenaline finally finding the gap in her controlled breathing and pushing through. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Somewhere in her chest, her heart was hitting with the specific insistence of a body that understood the stakes even when the mind was still managing the performance. Damien looked at her for a long, raw moment. Then he laughed. It was short and humorless and had the quality of a man releasing something that had been held at pressure too long. You came in here to flip me, he said. You came in here to flip me against Carver. Yes. That's either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. I've been told I'm smart, she said. So probably not the second one. He turned away from her, moved toward the loading platform edge, stood with his back to her and his hands at his sides. She watched his shoulders. She measured the contractors. She felt the transmitter at her collar and thought about Lucien 300 meters away in the dark, listening to a silence that told him nothing yet. If I cooperate, Damien said to the warehouse wall, Carver knows within 12 hours. His people are not... He stopped. They are not the people you want looking for you. I know. You don't. He turned around. His face had changed again. Not smooth now, not performing. The underneath of it visible in the harsh half-light, and what was underneath was exhaustion and something that had been cornered for long enough that it barely remembered open space. You think Moretti is dangerous. Carver is a different order of thing entirely. Then we need to move tonight, she said, before Carver knows anything changed. He looked at her. She looked at him. The warehouse was very cold and very quiet, and somewhere below them Martin Foss was waiting on an overturned crate, and the city was dark outside, and everything that had been building for 8 months, for 6 years, for longer than she could entirely calculate, was concentrated in this specific moment, in this specific space, between two people who had known each other in ways that were both intimate and entirely false. The transmitter in your collar, Damien said quietly. He can hear this. She didn't confirm or deny. Tell him, Damien stopped, pressed the heel of his hand against his eye socket briefly, a gesture she had never once seen him make before, unpolished and involuntary. Tell him if he wants Carver, I'll give him Carver, but it has to be tonight, and it has to be somewhere Carver's people can't anticipate. She did not reach for her collar. She did not need to. He heard you. In her earpiece, 3 seconds of silence. Then Lucien's voice, low and steady. Tell him we move in 20 minutes. And tell him Foss walks out first, non-negotiable. She looked at Damien. 20 minutes. Foss goes now. Damien looked at the 2 contractors, jerked his chin toward the stairs. One of them disappeared down. 30 seconds later, Selina heard footsteps on the ground floor. 2 sets, one steadier than the other. And then the sound of the side door opening and the cold outside air touching the edge of the stairwell. She exhaled, one small controlled exhale that she kept entirely inward. Foss was out. She looked back at Damien. His face was doing something she didn't have a word for. Not regret, not relief. Something rawer than either. The expression of a man standing at the specific edge of the person he had been for as long as he could remember and understanding, perhaps for the first time, that the edge was real and the ground below it was not far. He's out, Damien said, mostly to himself. Yes. He picked up his jacket from the nearby surface where he'd laid it. He put it on with the automatic precision of a man who dressed for armor, even when the armor had stopped working. Then he looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't looked in 6 years, or possibly ever, and said, "You were never going to come back." It wasn't a question. "No," she said, "even before Moretti." "Long before." He nodded once, a small nod. Not agreement with himself, just the acknowledgement of a fact arriving somewhere it had not been before. "I know," he said. The shot came from outside. Not from the building, from the service road, sharp and percussive, followed immediately by the crash of something large and fast moving through the exterior loading door at the far end of the bay. And then the earpiece exploded with Lucian's voice, stripped of every layer of composed unhurriedness, raw and direct, and carrying the particular velocity of a man who has just lost control of a situation he had carefully planned for. "Carver's people are here," Lucian said. "They were already in position. Selina, get down." The overhead lights went out. The warehouse went black. And in the darkness, Damien Cross grabbed her arm. Not with the precise, controlled grip from the ballroom, not the performance of a man managing appearances, but with the desperate, unguarded grip of a man who is suddenly, genuinely, out of options left. She pulled her arm free. Not away from him, sideways. A sharp rotation that broke his grip at the weakest point of his thumb. The way you learned to do it when someone had taught you once, years ago, a self-defense class she'd taken in the second year with Damien, because she'd told herself it was just fitness, just practical, just something to do, and had never examined too closely why she felt safer afterward. "Don't grab me," she said into the dark. "They'll kill us both," he said. His voice had lost everything, the smoothness, the calibration, all of it gone, and what was left was a man who was simply afraid and making no effort to hide it. "Get down and stay behind the columns," she said. She moved. She kept low and moved toward the nearest structural column by memory. She had mapped the space when she came in, the way she had learned to map every room in the last 8 months, every exit, every obstacle, every piece of furniture that could become cover or become a problem. Her hand found the column, cold steel. She pressed her back to it. In her earpiece, controlled chaos. Lucien's voice giving instructions in rapid Italian, then switching to English. "East Bay clear, West Bay compromised, 3 individuals on approach, Soren take the..." And then a burst of static that lasted 2 seconds and resolved back into movement, into the specific sound of trained people moving fast in dark spaces. From outside the warehouse, 2 more shots. Sharp cracks, the sound bouncing off the water and the concrete in a way that made direction difficult to determine. Then the sound of the exterior loading door at the far end of the upper bay being forced, not blown, forced, which meant whoever was coming through knew the building's layout and had the kind of patience that was more frightening than speed. Carver's people had been here before. She understood that in the specific, visceral way you understand things, when your body is running on adrenaline and your brain is doing its fastest work. They had been here before because this was their location, their contingency, their fallback if the original plan fractured. Damien had brought her here thinking it was his space. It had never been his space. It had always been Carver's. The loading door gave. 3 people came through. She could hear them by footstep and by the quality of the darkness changing. The way darkness changes when bodies move through it at speed. They spread out. She could hear the spread. Her phone was in her interior jacket pocket, and she was not going to use its light. She pressed harder against the column and thought. Foss was out. That was the only irreversible good thing about the last 10 minutes. Foss was out, and outside Dasha had him, and Lucien's people were moving, and the transmitter was live and broadcasting everything, including the gunshots and the forced door, and Damien's fear in the dark, and Rourke had an encrypted server that would open in 23 hours regardless. She was not going to die in this building. She was not going to die in this building because she had not driven Damien's pistol across the floor yet, and she had not activated anything yet, and the story did not end with the lights out in a warehouse that smelled like machine oil. She did not examine the logic of that. She just held it. Lucian's voice in her ear. "I'm inside, east stairwell. Tell me where you are." She pressed her lips close to her collar. "Upper Bay. Column 6 from the south wall, approximately. Damien is somewhere behind me, north quadrant. Carver's 3 came through the freight door west. Copy. A pause of approximately 4 seconds. There's a fire suppression panel on the south wall, 8 meters from your position. Emergency trigger, red cover, pull down. She almost said, "How do you know that?" and stopped herself because the answer was that Lucian Moretti had been in this building before too, and the answer to why could wait for a conversation they would have later in a lit room, sitting down. She moved. 8 meters along the south wall with her hand trailing the surface and her body low, moving in the specific crouched shuffle that made her feel ridiculous and kept her alive. Her fingers found a panel cover, square, metal, the slight ridge of a safety latch. She felt for the red handle, found it, pulled. The fire suppression system was not water, so it was a dry chemical discharge, and it came with a sound like a pressure release, like something that had been held at force for years, finally let go. And then the space filled with white chemical smoke that caught the emergency lighting that kicked on simultaneously. A dim red-orange wash that turned everything into shapes and shadows without resolving them into people. The smoke was immediate and total, and Selina pressed her sleeve over her mouth and moved. In the chaos, she heard one of Carver's people cough, involuntary, genuine, and she used the sound to locate position and moved away from it, toward the loading platform, toward the far end where the freight elevator shaft sat open and where the emergency lighting was slightly better because of an exterior vent. She heard Lucien before she saw him. "South wall, coming to you," he said in her earpiece. And then he was there, materializing out of the smoke with the specific, purposeful speed of a man who had navigated worse than this and was not spending any cognitive energy on the fact of it. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding freely and did not appear to have noticed. "You're bleeding," she said. "Later." He looked at her, a fast, complete assessment that lasted less than 2 seconds and was the most thorough look she had ever received from anyone. "The drives. On me. Intact. Rourke. Has server access 23 hours. He nodded once. "Damien. North quadrant when the lights went. He had 2 contractors of his own. I don't know where they went when Carver's people came through. Mine have 2 of Carver's contained downstairs. The 3rd one in the upper bay." He looked past her into the smoke. "I need you on the platform." "I'm not getting on a platform." "Elevated position. If Damien comes toward us, I need you visible." She looked at him. "You're using me as bait." "I'm using you as a negotiating position. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." His voice was direct and unapologetic. "He won't make a move toward me if you're in the sight line." "You know that's true." She did know that was true. She hated that she knew it and that it was still the most functional option in the current geometry of the space. She went to the loading platform and stepped up, 3 feet of elevation, which put her in the best light the emergency system was offering and made her the most visible thing in the upper bay. The smoke was thinning at the edges. The chemical discharge had created a temporary whiteout that was already beginning to layer, the heaviest particles dropping, the upper space clearing slightly. She saw Damien. He was at the north end of the bay, near the stairwell she had come up, and he had a pistol in his hand that had not been visible before, which meant it had been on him the whole time. A backup, a contingency, the kind of thing a man kept when he didn't trust the contractors he'd hired. He was looking at her on the platform, and his expression in the red-orange emergency light was something she had never seen on his face in 6 years. He looked like he didn't know what to do. She had never seen Damien Cross not know what to do. "Damien," she said, "put it down." "Carver's 3rd person is somewhere in this room," he said. His voice was controlled, but the control was the surface kind, the kind that could fracture. "I know. If I put it down, Lucien's people have 2 of them. The 3rd one," she looked at Lucien. He gave her a fractional nod that she took to mean contained or accounted for, or something close enough to function as confirmation. "Put it down." He looked at her for a long moment, the pistol lowered, not all the way, but down from the raised position, which was the intermediate step, the place people went before they committed to the final thing. "You said cooperate," he said. "Yes." "You said Rourke." "Yes." "If I cooperate," his jaw worked. Carver has people inside the regulatory structure. He has people at the level where cooperation agreements get reviewed. If he knows I'm talking, he already knows, Lucien said from the smoke. His voice carried without effort, without raising, the specific acoustic quality of a man who had spent decades speaking in rooms where what he said had weight. His people came here tonight because they already knew the timeline had changed, which means your window for negotiation is exactly as long as it takes for Rourke to open that server. Damien looked in the direction of Lucien's voice. And you, he said, what do you get out of this? Carver dismantled. A pause. He's been a problem for 2 years. You're the closest thing to a direct line I've had. You need my testimony. I need your documentation. The testimony is yours to offer. Something settled in Damien's expression. Not resolution, but the specific exhaustion that comes just before it. The pistol came down the rest of the way. He held it loosely at his side, and then he crouched and set it on the concrete floor, and when he straightened, his hands were empty. In her earpiece, Soren's voice. Upper Bay clear. Third individual is detained. She exhaled. This time she let it be visible. The next 40 minutes were controlled and loud and involved Rourke arriving with 4 officers 14 minutes after Lucy's call, which meant Rourke had either been very close or had been waiting for exactly this call, and Selina suspected the second thing and thought she would like Rourke considerably more than she had initially assumed. Damien was placed in handcuffs on the loading platform and read his rights by an officer who did it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done it many times. He did not resist. He looked at Selina while it happened, across the bay, and she looked back, and she waited to feel something complex, grief or vindication, or the specific bitter satisfaction of a thing completed, and what she felt instead was tired. Just tired. The good kind, she thought, the kind that comes after. Martin Foss was outside with Dasha and a blanket someone had produced, sitting in the back of a vehicle with the door open and a cup of something hot in both hands. Selina went to him before she went anywhere else. He looked up when she came, and his expression was the complicated one, the one she had expected to feel herself. They didn't know I was the one who flagged it, he said. At first, they thought they were keeping me away from a phone. They didn't realize... He stopped, looked at the cup. I had the drive the whole time. I know, you did the right thing making it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. He looked at her. 14 months of that structure, and nobody was asking the right questions until I started asking them, and then, another stop. Are you all right? You're the one who went in there. She almost laughed. I'm all right. Were you scared? She thought about it honestly. In the car on the way over. After that, I was too busy. He looked at her for a moment. Your hands are shaking. She looked at her hands. They were, very slightly, at the fingers. She hadn't noticed. Delayed, she said. Yes, he said, with the tone of a man who understood delayed physical responses. That's how it works. She sat down on the bumper of the vehicle beside him and let her hands shake for a little while, which was the first completely unmanaged thing she had done in approximately 6 hours, and it was fine. It was just the body accounting for what the mind had been holding. Lucien found her there 10 minutes later. The cut above his eyebrow had been addressed with a piece of medical tape by someone, applied with no particular care for aesthetics, which was the first thing about his appearance she had ever seen that was genuinely untidy. He sat down beside her, not close but present, and for a while neither of them said anything. Carver, she said finally, his name is in Damien's documentation. The financial transfers are traceable. Rourke has enough to bring him in within 48 hours. And once Damien's cooperation agreement is formalized, he paused. It ends. 14 months, she said. Yes. You were building this for 14 months and you needed the Marsh Capital files to close it. I needed someone who could legally access the files and recognize what they were looking at. He looked at the water, visible at the end of the service road, the harbor lights reflecting on the surface. I did not plan for that person to be you. I want to be clear about that. I know. Do you? She looked at him. In the harbor light and the flashing of the police vehicles, his face was doing that thing where very little showed on the surface, But she had been reading it long enough now to see what was underneath it. Not performance, not calculation, just a man sitting on a bumper in a port district at 4 in the morning with a piece of medical tape above his eye, waiting to find out where he stood. "Yes," she said. "I believe you." He nodded. "That doesn't mean the last 3 weeks were simple," she said. "No. You kept things from me." "I did. And you signed a document that said I had the right to all information relevant to my own situation." "I interpreted that narrowly," he said, "incorrectly." She looked at her hands. They had stopped shaking. "I'm going to need time," she said, "after tonight, to figure out what I actually feel about all of this versus what I feel because I'm running on adrenaline and it's 4 in the morning. That's reasonable." "I'm not ending this," she said. "I'm not saying that. I'm saying I need time, and I need you to not interpret my needing time as something to be managed or solved." He looked at her then. A long, direct look. "I'm not good at waiting," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I can do it, but I want you to know it costs me something." That was the third thing she hadn't been prepared for. That specific honesty. Not performing patience, not performing acceptance, just saying plainly what was true. "It costs me something." "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "Thank you for asking for what you need," he said. They sat on the bumper while the police worked around them, and the harbor moved at the end of the road, and the city held its particular restless quiet, and Foss fell asleep sitting up beside them, which was either a sign of exhaustion or trust or both. The formal process took weeks. Damien's cooperation agreement was negotiated through a lawyer who was not from Cross, Halloran, and Associates, for obvious reasons, and was finalized 12 days after the warehouse. Rourke called Selina 3 times during that period, never to ask for more information. She had given him everything the night of, but to update her on developments, which she appreciated more than she told him. Carver was brought in on a Tuesday morning quietly at an airport, attempting to board a flight to Zurich. He was accompanied by a lawyer and said nothing for the first 11 hours of questioning, and then said a great deal, which was how men like Carver always went. Silence until the silence became more expensive than cooperation. Damien Cross entered a plea agreement 4 weeks after the warehouse. The charges included kidnapping, fraud, corporate espionage, and participation in an organized criminal financial conspiracy. The sentencing was scheduled for 3 months later in a courtroom Selina did not attend. She was not required to attend. She chose not to. She told Gerald about the Marsh Capital files 3 days after the warehouse, sitting in his office in the early morning with the city still gray outside and a cup of coffee going cold between them. She told him everything: the Arkin connection, the shell structure, the way the failed acquisitions had been influenced, the reason her position had been targeted. She told him about the encrypted server in Rourke and what the files contained. She did not minimize her role in accessing them, and she did not apologize for it. Gerald listened without interrupting, which was something he almost never did. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, "You could have come to me." "With a hypothesis and no evidence?" "No." He looked at his coffee cup. "You should have come to me." "Gerald," she kept her voice kind, "you called me into this office and told me to be careful about Lucien Moretti's name being attached to anything in this company, based on a phone call from Damien Cross. He had the specific expression of a man recognizing the moment he made the wrong call and being too honest to pretend otherwise. "Fair," he said. "That's fair." She resigned 6 weeks after the warehouse. Not because she had to. Gerald had offered her a raise and a title adjustment and a sincerity that she believed was genuine. She resigned because a conversation with Martin Foss, over coffee in a place near his office, had led to a longer conversation about what the Moretti Financial Network's legitimate holdings actually looked like, and what a charitable foundation operating at that scale could do with the right organizational structure, and someone who understood both the legal documentation side and the human side of institutional giving. She had spent 8 months managing Gerald Marsh's professional life with more competence than anyone had noticed. She was not interested in being unnoticed anymore. Foss introduced her to the Foundation's interim board 3 weeks after her resignation. She walked into the room prepared, because she had spent 2 weeks preparing, and she walked out with the role confirmed, because she had spent 8 months proving that she could do things considerably harder than this. Lucien was not in that meeting. He had recused himself from the hiring decision on the grounds that it needed to be structurally independent of his personal interests, which was the kind of organizational ethics she had not expected from him and probably should have by then. She had found a memo from the Foundation's legal team confirming the recusal and had stood in her kitchen reading it for longer than was strictly necessary. She called him that evening. "I got the role," she said. "I know." A pause. "Congratulations." "You shouldn't know. You recused yourself." "I recused myself from the decision. I still have ears." She sat down on her couch. Her apartment looked the same as it had for 8 months. The same furniture, the same corkboard above the desk, the signed agreement still pinned to it with the handwritten note in the precise left-leaning script. "When does the restructuring start?" "Next quarter. The arc and unwinding is complete as of this week. The 3 shell positions have been dissolved. The legitimate portfolio is being separated into 3 distinct legal structures, the largest of which is the Foundation. I'm going to need full access to all 3 structures. You'll have it. And I'm going to challenge decisions when I think they're wrong. I expect that. And I'm going to do this job the way I think it should be done, not the way it's convenient for the broader organization." "Selina." His voice was quiet. "I offered you the role because those things are true about you, not in spite of them." She pressed her phone against her cheek and looked at her apartment and thought about the dress in the dry cleaning bag, which was no longer in the dry cleaning bag because she had worn it twice more in the last 6 weeks and intended to wear it again. She thought about the shower and the cereal and the 8 months and the notebook with the small handwriting. She thought about Foss and his drive and the way he'd fallen asleep on the bumper at 4 in the morning with the implicit trust of a man who had decided the situation was handled. "I'm still taking my time," she said. "I know," he said. "But I'd like to have dinner, not a public appearance, not an arrangement." She paused. "Just dinner." A pause on his end. Short. She could not tell what was in it, and that was fine. She had learned that not every pause needed to be decoded immediately. Some things were allowed to develop at their own pace, in their own time, without being controlled in advance. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow." She put the phone down. Outside, the city moved at the pace cities move, indifferent and continuous, full of people making calculations about their own lives, their own risks, their own versions of sitting on bumpers at 4 in the morning, deciding whether the thing they wanted was worth the cost of wanting it. The light was going from gray to the particular orange of late evening, the color she had come to associate with the end of things and the beginning of others, which was the same color, she had noticed, and maybe always had been. On the corkboard above her desk, the signed agreement held its pin. She did not take it down. She did not need to take it down. It was not a reminder of a transaction. It was a record of the first moment she had demanded in writing that her independence be acknowledged as a condition of her presence, and the first moment someone had signed it without reading it twice, without negotiating, without finding the clause that could be used against her later. She had built her second life carefully, 1 inch at a time, in the hours before dawn when no one was watching, in the work she did better than anyone noticed, in the dress she finally wore, and the notebook she filled and the door she walked through at 3 in the morning, not because someone sent her, but because she understood the geometry of the room. She had not been rescued. Not by Lucien, not by the transmitter, not by Rourke's server or Foss's backup drive or the fire suppression system that had filled an abandoned warehouse with white smoke and given her 8 seconds of cover to move. She had been present. She had been prepared. She had been, against all the evidence that 6 years had tried to build against her, the person in the room who understood the situation most clearly and acted on that understanding without waiting for someone else to make it safe first. 3 months later, at the grand opening of the Moretti Foundation's headquarters, a converted building in a neighborhood that had needed exactly this kind of anchor for a decade, Selina stood at the entrance and watched people she had worked with for 6 weeks walk through the doors into something they had built together and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that was real. Lucien was beside her, not in front of her, not slightly behind her, beside her at the same level, in the specific physical grammar of 2 people who had negotiated their proximity deliberately and arrived at something that suited them both. "You gave a very good speech," he said. "I wrote it myself." "I know." I could tell. She looked at the building, at the people, at the work that was already happening inside it, that would continue happening after today, that did not depend on her presence every moment to sustain itself because she had built it with that independence already inside the structure. You told me that first night, she said, to use you to upset my ex. I did. That was a terrible opening line. It worked. She turned to look at him. In the afternoon light, he looked older than he had in the ballroom, which was not a bad thing, just a real thing, the accumulated weight of a life that had not been gentle with him in every particular, the same way her face in the mirror had started showing things she used to try to manage and had stopped trying to manage. Then you told me I was staying with you, she said. Yes. You were very certain about that. I was very wrong about that, he said. You were never staying because I said so. You were staying because you chose to. A pause. I think I knew that even then. I just wanted to say it. Why? He looked at her for a moment. The composed stillness, the controlled surface, and underneath it the thing she had learned to read, which was not hidden so much as held, deliberately, carefully, in the way you hold something you have not trusted yourself to put down before. Because I had not felt certain about a single thing in a very long time, he said, and I wanted to know what it felt like to say something certain out loud. She reached into her jacket pocket. The jacket was not the one from the warehouse. That one was in a bag somewhere, evidence tagged, probably never coming back. This was a different jacket, well fitted, her own choice entirely. In the pocket was a small object she had picked up 3 days ago from a jeweler whose name Foss had given her, because Foss had, it turned out, excellent taste in jewelers and in most other things. She did not give the object to Lucien. She opened the small box herself and took out the ring and put it on her own finger, which was the only way she had ever been going to do this. Not received, not placed, but chosen with both hands and put on by the person it belonged to. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Something moved in his expression that she had not seen before. Unguarded, unmanaged, the surface and the underneath the same thing for once, which was the rarest thing he ever showed. That's my ring, he said. No, she said. It's mine. You gave it to me. I haven't given it to you yet. I know. She looked at it on her finger. I found it last week in the foundation office. He was quiet. You left it on my desk, she said. I left it near your desk. Lucien. In the general vicinity of your... You left it on my desk. She looked at him. No pressure, no demand, just there. He said nothing. That's why, she said. That's the actual reason. Not the gala, not the warehouse, not the foundation. She held his gaze. You left a ring where I could find it or not find it, take it or not take it, and you didn't say a word, and you waited. I'm not good at waiting, he said. We've established that. You waited. A pause, then, yes. I stayed, she said, because I wanted to. The afternoon held them there for a moment, outside the building they had made, in the light that had turned from gray to orange to the particular gold of a city moving toward evening, with the sound of voices and work coming from inside, and the city continuing its indifferent, continuous motion all around them. She had been the woman who doubted every thought she had, who had spent 6 years being slowly persuaded that her judgment was unreliable, her instincts faulty, her assessment of her own worth subject to revision downward. She had believed some of it. That was the part she did not look away from, the part that was truest and hardest and most worth carrying forward honestly. She had believed some of it, and she had been wrong. Not because someone told her she was wrong, because she had stood in the wreckage of what she'd believed and started, one careful inch at a time, building something that was hers. And it had held. The inches had held. The notebook, the dress, the conditions written in 4 drafts, the transmitter in the collar, the fire suppression panel 8 meters along the south wall, the drive she had made copies of, the call to Rourke at 2 a.m. with the time lock. She had held. She put her hand in the crook of Lucien Moretti's arm. Not for the cameras this time, not for the geometry of a ballroom, not to make anyone jealous or afraid or uncertain. And they walked into the building together. No one watching would have known the weight of it. She knew. That was enough.